heard it wading behind us before I saw it, the water parting with a steadier rhythm than any man's stride, reeds shivering in a circle that did not match the wind. The night air in the swamp had turned oddly cool, as if some great body displaced it. Our lantern flame guttered without smoke. When I turned, the black water bulged upward, and something pale slid just beneath the surface, keeping pace. Men have asked me to recount this, though I sometimes wish the tale had died with the others. If you are inclined to such accounts, lend your ear, mark your approval, and set down your thoughts. For I would know which path you might have chosen had you stood where we stood, in that drowned country. To understand what followed us through the swamp, I must return to May of 1910, when our party left the coast of British New Guinea with more confidence than sense. I was 30 that year, a surveyor in the employ of a small Sydney syndicate that had secured rights to prospect inland along the Fly River and its tributaries. Reports from earlier traders spoke of alluvial gold and promising quartz veins in the interior, where the great lowland forests gave way to swampland and sago country. The administration at Port Moresby encouraged such ventures, so long as we kept our rifles clean and our tempers cleaner. We sailed from Thursday Island on the 3rd of May aboard the lugger Marama, a tired little vessel with a reliable engine and an unreliable cook. Our party numbered 6 Europeans and 4 Papuan boys engaged as carriers and general hands. There was Henderson, our nominal leader, a broad-shouldered Queenslander who had driven cattle before turning his attention to minerals. Carter, a lean English geologist with a pince-nez that he polished with almost religious care. Macready, a former naval man who handled our rifles and wireless set. Young Evans, barely 22, who had come north from Melbourne chasing adventure and a fortune to send home to his mother. I served as surveyor and keeper of the field notes. The Papuan men were called Peter, Kalo, Miri, and a fourth who gave his name so softly I wrote it as best I could. Tanu. We took ashore survey chains, Brunton compasses, a theodolite in its brass-bound case, canvas tents, kerosene lanterns, tinned meat and biscuits, sacks of rice, a small hand-operated winch for river crossings, and rifles enough for each of us. It was the dry season by local reckoning, though that only meant the rains came once a day rather than all afternoon. Mosquitoes rose in black clouds at dusk, and the air held the constant smell of damp earth and rotting vegetation. From the mission station at Daru, we secured a dugout canoe and 2 more local men to pole us up one of the Fly's lesser arms. The missionary, a tired German named Vogel, tried to dissuade us from our chosen route. He traced a line on our map with a nicotine-stained finger, tapping the green expanse beyond the last-named village. "Plenty country there," he said. "But the people inland, they do not come down. And the ones here, they do not like to speak of that swamp. They say it is not for men." Henderson smiled in that way he had when he believed someone was being superstitious. "There is always a swamp between a man and a bit of gold, Father. We shall be back before you need worry over us." Vogel only nodded and pressed a small wooden cross into Evans's hand. "Then you must go with open eyes," he said. "And listen, when the forest is quiet, it is a bad thing when the forest forgets to speak." At the time, I took his remark as the usual missionary poetry. I had been in New Guinea before, had heard a dozen similar warnings couched in talk of spirits and forbidden places. The country was full of them. One could not walk a mile without treading on someone's taboo. We noted the advice, thanked him for his hospitality, and pushed inland. The first week passed in the ordinary discomforts of such travel. We moved up the narrowing river by day, poling and paddling, dragging the canoe over shallows, and at night we made camp on the least sodden ground we could find. The forest rose on either side, a wall of buttressed trunks and tangled vines, alive with the cries of birds and the far-off coughing of hornbills. Insects sang in a continuous, shrill chorus. Our shirts never dried. Leeches found their way beneath our gaiters, yet spirits were high. It was on the fifth evening, as we sat around a small smoky fire, that the first unease brushed against me, so lightly that I almost missed it. We had eaten our rice and bully beef, and Macready was coaxing the wireless to life, attempting to catch a faint signal from the coastal station. The set crackled and hissed, offering nothing intelligible. Carter sat with his back against a tree, pipe in his mouth, examining a small piece of quartz he had picked up from a sandbank that afternoon. Evans squatted by the fire, turning Vogel's little cross in his fingers. "Where will you go when you have made your fortune?" I asked him. It was idle talk, the sort that comes when the day's labor is done and the night has not yet grown oppressive. "Home," he said at once. "My mother has a cottage near Geelong. It wants repairs. A bit of land behind, enough for vegetables. My brother says we might buy the paddock next to it if I can send enough." He smiled, the firelight catching on the fine down of his cheek. "What of you, sir?" "I have no cottage," I said. "Only a room in Sydney and more maps than I can hang upon its walls. I suppose I shall go where the work is. There is always another line to be drawn, another river to be named." He considered this. "Do you not tire of it? Of the work? At times. Of the country? Never. It is a strange thing. To stand where few men of our kind have stood. To see what most will only read about in some column of small print." Evans nodded, his gaze drifting toward the darkness beyond the fire. "My mother says there are some things man was not meant to see," he said softly. "But she has never been beyond the bay. I think she imagines the world ends there." "Many do," I replied. "And yet here we sit, quite alive at the edge of her imagination." Even as I spoke, a small, precise silence fell over the camp. The insect chorus faltered, as though some unseen conductor had lowered his hand. The fire crackled, and the river murmured nearby, but the countless small voices of the forest seemed to draw in their breath and hold it. I remember looking up, pipe halfway to my mouth, and meeting Carter's eye. He had felt it too. It lasted only a few heartbeats before the sounds resumed, a little out of time, as if they had been startled and were now pretending that nothing had occurred. "Storm coming," Henderson said, glancing at the low clouds. "The barometer has been falling all afternoon." We accepted that explanation readily enough. I wrote nothing of the silence in my notebook that night. We left the river on the seventh day, turning eastward along a narrow creek that our guide said would lead toward the sago swamps. The country sank gradually under our feet. The trees grew taller and more widely spaced, their roots forming great arches above dark water. The air thickened, taking on a sour, stagnant odor. We walked along fallen trunks and mats of vegetation that trembled under our weight. The canoe could go no further, so we cached it and some non-essential stores on a small rise, marking the spot on my map. The Papuan men grew quieter as we entered the swamp. They spoke among themselves in low tones, casting uneasy glances at the water. When I asked Kalo what troubled them, he only shook his head. "Many stories here," he said. "Old stories. Not for us." "Crocodiles," I suggested. He hesitated. "Crocodile is better," he said at last, and would say no more. We pressed on. Our boots sank into black mud that clung like glue. Leeches swarmed. Mosquitoes whined at our ears. The sun became a pale, indistinct glow seen through layers of foliage and mist. We navigated by compass bearing and the occasional glimpse of the sky, taking notes with damp pencils, measuring our progress in slow, laborious chains. It was 2 days into this country that we found the first tracks. They appeared on a strip of firmer ground where the water had receded, leaving a ribbon of grey mud between two pools. Henderson, walking ahead, stopped so abruptly that Evans nearly collided with him. I came up and saw at once why he had halted. The impressions were arranged in a line, as if some creature had walked there not long before. Each print was roughly oval, perhaps 10 inches long, with a deep central depression and 2 shallower marks toward the front, like the suggestion of claws or extended toes. They were spaced at regular intervals that suggested a stride longer than a man's. The mud within them was still oozing, the edges crisp. "Cassowary," Carter said at once, though his voice lacked conviction. "The mud has distorted the shape." I crouched beside one, measuring it against my hand. "Cassowary prints show 3 distinct toes," I said, "and they do not walk in such a straight, narrow line. See how these almost fall one in front of the other." "Then a crocodile," Henderson said. "They sometimes leave queer marks when they drag themselves across." "There is no tail groove," McCready observed, "and the claws of a crocodile are sharper. These are soft." He reached out with the butt of his rifle and tapped the edge of one print. A thin trickle of water seeped in, blurring it. The smell that rose from the disturbed mud was ranker than the surrounding swamp, a sour, musky odor that made me think of a menagerie cage left uncleaned for too long. "Whatever made them, it is gone now," Henderson said briskly. "We have no time to play naturalist. Mark it in your notes if you like. But we are not here to catalogue curiosities." I did mark it, sketching the outline as best I could. At the time, I was inclined to agree with Carter. The swamp played tricks on shape and distance. I had seen pig tracks that looked like human hands and fallen branches that resembled coiled snakes. Still, there was something in the regularity of those impressions that stayed with me. That night, as we lay in our damp blankets under a canvas fly, I woke to a sound that I took at first for distant thunder. It was a low, rhythmic thudding, muffled by water and distance, like a heavy object striking a hollow log again and again. It came from somewhere beyond the ring of our small camp in the direction we had walked that day. I counted the beats, 4 in quick succession, then a pause, then 3, then a longer silence, then 4 again. It went on for several minutes. None of the others stirred, or if they did, they made no sign. Eventually, the sound faded, replaced by the usual groans and sighs of the swamp. I told myself it was some local practice, men beating on sago trunks to loosen the pith, or perhaps a drum in a village we had not yet seen. Had I understood then that it was a pattern, I might have woken the others. But I rolled over and went back to sleep. The following day brought little of note in our search for gold, but several small disquieting details accumulated like silt in the back of my mind. We found a stand of sago palms that had been worked recently, their trunks scarred and split, yet there were no footprints nearby, no sign of habitation. A dead pig lay half submerged in a pool, its body untouched by scavengers despite the heat. The Papuan men spoke even less, their eyes darting to the water at every splash. Near midday, as we paused to consult the compass, a flock of cockatoos exploded from the canopy ahead with a shrill, panicked screech. They wheeled above us in a white storm, then fled back the way we had come. The forest fell into that same strained silence we had heard before. Even the mosquitoes seemed to hesitate. "Perhaps there is a snake," Evans said, licking dry lips. "Then it had best keep out of our way," Henderson replied, but he checked the chamber of his rifle all the same. By the second week inland, my rational explanations had begun to feel thin, stretched over holes I did not wish to look at too closely. The tracks appeared again, once crossing a patch of soft ground we had walked only hours before, as if something had passed along our own route, following us. They were fresher this time, the water still trembling in the depressions. We also began to notice small disarrangements in our camp each morning. A billy left beside the fire would be found a few yards away, half submerged in a puddle. A coil of rope, neatly hung, would lie in a tangle on the ground. Once, a canvas pack was discovered with its straps unbuckled, though nothing had been taken. We blamed possums or monkeys or the careless hands of tired men. On the 12th day, our guides refused to go further. We had reached a stretch of swamp where the trees thinned and the water spread into a broad, reed-choked expanse, broken by low, floating islands of vegetation. Beyond it, according to my calculations, lay slightly higher ground where we might find the gravel bars and creek beds that interested Carter. But when Henderson ordered the Papuan men to begin probing a path with their poles, they stood as if carved from wood. "No more," Kalo said. His face, normally open and good-humored, was tight with fear. "This place is finished. We go back." "You are paid to go where I say," Henderson replied, his voice hardening. "There is no village here to offend, no men to tell you stories, only water and trees. You are not children." Kalo looked at the water, then at me. "He does not hear," he said in his own tongue, but I caught enough to understand. "Tell him. We go back." "What is it that you fear?" I asked in the trade language we shared. "Is it sickness, a spirit, an enemy?" He hesitated, then made a gesture with his hand, flat and low, moving it through the air as if something swam just beneath the surface. "Old thing," he said, "from before our grandfathers. It walks where there is no ground. It does not like men. The stories say when it follows, you do not see it. Only you do not go home." I relayed this as neutrally as I could. Henderson snorted. "More bogey tales," he said. "We have come too far to turn back because of some old woman's story. If they will not go on, we shall go without them. They can wait here with half the stores until we return." The argument lasted an hour, but in the end, the Papuan men would not be moved. They would go back to the cached canoe, they said, and no further into the swamp. If we insisted on continuing, it would be without their help. In retrospect, that was the moment we should have turned. 4 Europeans, however stubborn, had no business pushing deeper into that country without local knowledge. But the thought of retreating with nothing to show for our trouble sat ill with Henderson, and pride is a powerful spur. "We go on for 3 days," he said at last. "If we find nothing, we return. That is fair." It was not, but we agreed to it. We divided the stores, leaving the heavier equipment and half the food with the Papuan men, and set out with our packs and rifles, 4 white men alone in a vast, indifferent swamp. The first day without the others passed in a grim, quiet determination. We moved more slowly, forced to cut our own way through denser patches of undergrowth and to test each step ourselves. The water grew deeper in places, rising to our thighs, then our waists. The mud sucked at our boots. Leeches found every gap in our clothing. The sun, when we saw it, was a dull disk behind a veil of vapor. That night, we made camp on a small, spongy hummock, barely large enough for our tent. The air was heavy, pressing against the canvas. As we lay in the dark, listening to the drip of water and the distant calls of unseen creatures, the low, rhythmic thudding began again. This time, there was no mistaking it. 4 beats, a pause, 3, a longer pause, then 4, closer than before. The sound seemed to come not from one direction, but from the water itself, as if the swamp had grown a heartbeat. "Do you hear that?" Evans whispered. "Yes," I said. Macready swore softly. "Drums," he said. "There must be a village nearby after all." "In this?" Carter murmured. "Where would they build? On stilts in the mud?" The pattern repeated, patient and steady. I found myself counting the intervals, as if there might be some meaning in them. 4, 3, 4, 4, 3, 4. It went on for nearly an hour, then ceased so abruptly that the silence rang. We spoke little of it in the morning. Henderson declared it the work of some unknown bird, or perhaps a natural resonance from the trees as the temperature changed. His explanations were beginning to sound like a man patching a leaking boat with paper, but I clung to them because the alternative was to admit that something in that place was aware of us. By the 3rd day beyond the others, even Henderson's resolve had begun to fray. We had found no promising outcrops, no sign of gold-bearing strata, only endless water and rotting vegetation. Our boots were in tatters. Our food was running low. The swamp seemed to have no end. It was late afternoon when we reached what I can only describe as a clearing, though there were no open spaces in the usual sense. The trees thinned and the water spread into a broad, flat expanse broken by clumps of reeds and floating mats of plants. A faint mist hung over it, smelling of stagnant water and something else, a faint metallic tang like old blood. "We camp here," Henderson said. "Tomorrow we turn back." We set about our usual tasks, gathering what dry wood we could find, checking our rifles, hanging our damp clothes in a vain hope they might dry. The light faded quickly, the sky a low, oppressive lid. The insect chorus swelled, then faltered, then swelled again. It was as I bent over the fire, coaxing it with a twist of paper, that the mid-afternoon calm shattered. From the reeds at the edge of the open water, perhaps 20 yards away, came a sound like nothing I had heard before. It was a deep, wet exhalation, as if some great bellows had been squeezed underwater. The reeds bowed outward as though something large had brushed against them from beneath. The surface of the water bulged, forming a low, moving hump that travelled in a slow arc, then sank. Evans cried out and dropped the billy. Carter froze, his match burning down to his fingers. Macready raised his rifle, eyes wide. "There," he whispered. "Did you see?" The reeds parted again, closer this time, and a pale shape slid just beneath the surface. It was not the flash of a crocodile's back, nor the quick, sinuous movement of a snake. It was broader, more deliberate, like the back of some great animal that chose not to break the skin of the water. The swamp fell utterly silent. No insects, no frogs, no bird calls, only the faint lap of disturbed water against the roots. "Stand still," Henderson said softly. "Do not fire unless I say." We stood as if rooted, watching the slow progress of that unseen body beneath the surface. It moved in a wide circle around our hummock, reeds bending in its wake, water bulging and subsiding. Once, for the briefest instant, something broke the surface. A suggestion of pale, smooth hide, glistening, with a line or crease that might have been a fold of skin or the edge of some limb. Then it was gone again. The air grew colder, a clammy chill that did not match the climate. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. A pressure built in my ears, as if the air itself had thickened. "Perhaps it is a crocodile," Evans whispered, though his voice trembled. "A very large one." "Crocodiles do not move like that," Carter said, his usual dryness gone. "They do not circle so deliberately. They do not watch." The bulge in the water halted directly opposite us, no more than 15 yards away. The reeds there quivered, then slowly parted, as if some great head pushed between them. I found myself holding my breath, waiting for it to rise. Instead, the low, rhythmic thudding began again, so close that I felt it through my boots. 4 beats, a pause. 3, a pause. 4. It was not in the air, but in the ground itself, as if something beneath the water struck against the buried roots and trunks. "Enough," Henderson said, his voice strained. "We are leaving. Now." We did not argue. We snatched up our packs, some half-fastened, some spilling their contents, and stumbled back the way we had come. Across the uncertain mats of vegetation, through waist-deep water that clutched at our legs. Behind us, the water heaved again, and the thudding grew louder, closer, as if whatever moved beneath the surface had decided that our time in its domain was finished. We did not look back until full dark had fallen, and the swamp had grown so thick around us that we could go no further without breaking our necks. Only then did we risk a small shielded fire and a hasty, whispered counsel. None of us slept more than a few minutes at a time. Each time I closed my eyes, I felt again that steady, unnatural vibration through the ground. In the morning, we discovered that one of the packs was missing. It had been set down beside the others, its straps looped over a low branch. Now the branch was bare. There were no drag marks, no disturbed mud, no floating scraps of canvas. The pack, containing some of our remaining food and Carter's spare field notebooks, had simply ceased to exist. We searched the immediate area, though none of us wished to stray far from the others. There was no sign of it. The swamp had taken it as neatly as if a hand had reached up from beneath the water and plucked it away. After that, our journey back became less an orderly retreat and more a desperate flight. The rationale part of my mind, the part that measured distances and took bearings, continued to function, but it did so in the background, drowned by a rising tide of fear. We moved as quickly as the treacherous ground allowed, stumbling, cursing, our boots filling with black water. The steady thudding returned at odd intervals, sometimes far off. Sometimes so near that the surface of the pools around us trembled. Once, as we were wading through a channel chest-deep in foul water, Evans gave a strangled cry and lurched sideways. I grabbed his arm, thinking he had lost his footing, but his eyes were wide with terror. "Something touched me," he gasped. "It slid along my leg. It was cold." "Eel," Henderson said at once. "Or a fish. Keep moving." But I saw the way his own jaw clenched, the way his eyes flicked to the water with a fear he could not quite conceal. By the time we reached the place where we had parted from the Papuan men, 2 days had passed in this fashion. We stumbled onto the slightly firmer ground like shipwrecked sailors crawling onto a beach. The cached stores were there, as we had left them, but of the men there was no sign. At first, we told ourselves they had simply grown tired of waiting and taken the canoe back to the mission. But the fire pit was cold, the ashes scattered as if by hurried hands. A length of rope lay coiled on the ground, its end frayed as if it had been cut in haste. One of the wooden poles that had supported their shelter stood at an odd angle, its base sunk deeper into the mud, as if something heavy had leaned against it from below. On the edge of the clearing, half hidden under a fern, I found Vogel's little wooden cross. Its cord was broken, the wood darkened by damp. We called their names until our throats were raw. The swamp gave no answer. That night, we camped there because there was nowhere else to go. The thudding did not come, but the silence that fell over the forest was worse. It was as if the whole swamp were holding its breath, listening. In the morning, we faced a choice. We could follow the river back toward the coast in the hope that the Papuan men had indeed gone ahead of us. Or we could attempt to search the swamp for them, knowing what moved beneath its surface. It was not a choice at all. Even Henderson, for all his stubbornness, knew that to go back into that drowned country would be to vanish as completely as our guides had. We loaded the canoe, distributed the packs, and pushed off. The journey downriver should have been easier than the one up, but the current seemed sluggish, as if reluctant to release us. Logs that had not been there before blocked our path, forcing us to wade and drag the canoe around them. Once, as we were hauling it over a shallow, the hull lurched violently to one side, nearly capsizing us. I felt something hard and unyielding strike the underside, then slide along its length, like a great body passing beneath. "Rock," Macready said, though there were no rocks in that stretch, only mud and water. His hands shook as he lit his pipe that night. We saw no sign of the Papuan men along the banks. No footprints, no cut branches, no smoke. Only once did we find any trace that they had existed at all. A single familiar hat, snagged in the roots of a tree, its brim torn. It belonged to Miri. There was no blood on it, no other sign of violence. It might have fallen from a passing canoe. We left it where it was. When at last we reached the mission station, gaunt and hollow-eyed, Vogel came out to meet us. His gaze passed over our diminished number, and his face tightened. "You went where I told you not to go," he said quietly. "Yes," Henderson replied. "Then you have brought something back with you," Vogel said. "Not in your packs, in your heads." We told him what we could, omitting some details even then, because to speak of them felt like giving them weight. Vogel listened without interruption, his hands folded. When we finished, he sighed. "I have heard such stories before," he said. "From the inland people, from a trader who went up the Bamu and came back alone. They speak of an old thing in the swamps. It does not belong to their tales of spirits. It is older. They say it knows the sound of a man's heart, that it can make the ground forget it ever held your feet." "What is it?" Evans asked. his voice barely more than a whisper. Vogel shook his head. I am a man of God, not a naturalist. I believe in many things I cannot see, but whatever that is, it is not in my Bible. We stayed at the mission for 3 days, regaining some of our strength before a coastal steamer took us back to Port Moresby. There, in a hot, airless office, we made our official report to the administration. The document that bears my name and those of the others is a dry, factual account. It states that the expedition proceeded inland along the Fly River, encountered difficult swamp country, and was forced to turn back due to sickness among the carriers and the loss of 2 men to unknown causes, presumed drowning. It notes that no significant gold-bearing deposits were found, though the geological prospects remain uncertain pending further exploration. There is no mention of the tracks in the mud, nor of the rhythmic thudding, nor of the pale shape sliding beneath the water. There is no mention of the missing pack, or of the way the forest fell silent, or of the cold touch on Evans's leg. There is certainly no mention of an old thing in the swamp that walks where there is no ground. We argued, of course, before we signed it. We must tell them what we saw, Evans said, his hands clenched on the edge of the table. They must know, if other men go there. And what shall we tell them? Henderson asked, his voice flat with exhaustion. That a monster from the time of Noah lurks in the mud and eats men whole? That the swamp itself rises up to snatch our packs? They will laugh us out of the room. They will say we were drunk or fevered or afraid of shadows. Carter, who had spoken little since our return, adjusted his pince-nez with a hand that trembled slightly. We have no specimen, he said. No measurements, no photographs, no bones, no skin. Only our impressions, formed under great stress in a hostile environment. As a man of science, I cannot, in good conscience, present such a thing as fact. And as a man of conscience? I asked. He looked at me then, his eyes hollow. As a man of conscience, I will not be the one to send others into that place with tales of treasure and no mention of what waits there. But if we put such claims in an official report, they will be removed, and we will be marked as unreliable. Better to speak quietly to those who will listen. In the end, we agreed to the sanitized version. We told ourselves that any man who read between the lines would see the warning there. Difficult country, loss of life, poor prospects. No one would be eager to follow in our footsteps. The steamer that took me back to Australia was clean and bright, its decks scrubbed, its cabins smelling of polish and tobacco instead of rot. The sea was a different blue from the swamp water, open and honest. Yet even there, far from the mangroves, I found no real peace. The first night out, I woke to the steady thud of the ship's engines. 4 beats, a pause, 3, a pause, 4. For a moment, half asleep, I was back in the swamp, the darkness pressing close, the water trembling around my boots. My heart hammered in my throat. Then a wave slapped the hull, and the illusion broke. I lay there in my narrow bunk, sweating in the cool sea air, and listened until I could convince myself that the rhythm was different. In the years that followed, the swamp did not leave me. I returned to my work as a surveyor, walking other lines on other maps in drier, more forgiving countries. I married, somewhat late, a patient woman who tolerated my occasional silences and my habit of waking in the small hours to listen to the night. We had a daughter. I hung my instruments on the wall and taught younger men how to hold a compass steady. Yet there were moments when the past reached up like a root in the dark and caught my foot. Once, in 1915, I was sent to assist with the laying out of a military camp near a marshy stretch of the Hunter River. The war had begun, and there was talk of sending men to far-off places whose names they could not yet pronounce. As I walked the edge of the reed beds, measuring distances, the wind shifted, and a smell came to me, a faint, sour musk, overlaid with the scent of stagnant water. For an instant, the neat paddocks and gum trees around me vanished, replaced by towering buttress roots and a sky reduced to a pale smear. I heard, or thought I heard, a distant, muffled thud. My assistant, a cheerful lad from Bathurst, looked at me oddly. "Are you unwell, sir?" he asked. I realized I had stopped in mid-stride, my hand gripping the staff so tightly my knuckles were white. "I am quite well," I lied. "The ground is a little soft, that is all." Another time, years later, I was sitting in a church hall listening to my daughter's piano recital. The children's hesitant notes filled the room. Between pieces, there was a moment when the audience shifted, coughed, rustled programs, and the piano's low strings vibrated faintly from some stray touch. The sound they made, a deep, muted pulse, sent a chill up my spine so sudden that I nearly rose from my chair. I forced myself to remain seated, to smile at my daughter when she glanced my way. On occasion, I met or corresponded with the others who had shared that journey. Not often. There was a sense, unspoken, that to gather all four of us in one room would be to thicken the air with something best left thin. In 1912, I received a letter from Carter, written in his neat, precise hand on paper, bearing the letterhead of a London museum. He had returned to England and taken a position there, cataloguing specimens brought back by other men. "I find myself increasingly occupied by reports from New Guinea," he wrote. "Not only ours, but those of earlier and later expeditions. There are scattered references, always oblique, to disturbances in the swamps. Missing men, unexplained sounds, animals refusing to enter certain waters. Nothing that would satisfy a committee, of course. But taken together, they form a pattern that troubles me. I have attempted to interest some colleagues in a comparative study of these accounts, but they smile and say that the tropics play tricks on the mind. Perhaps they are right. Yet I cannot help but feel that we brushed against something that does not fit within our present categories. It is an uncomfortable thought for a man who has made a profession of naming things." He closed with a brief, almost embarrassed inquiry after my health, and a mention that he had taken to avoiding the Natural History Museum's whale hall, as the echo there reminded him too much of a certain swamp. I wrote back, confessing that I too heard echoes where none should be, and that I had not set foot in a mangrove since our return. My letter went unanswered. Some months later, I learned through a mutual acquaintance that Carter had succumbed to influenza. I wondered, in some irrational corner of my mind, if the swamp had simply taken a little longer to claim him. Of Henderson and Evans, my knowledge is more fragmentary. Henderson returned to Queensland and, by all accounts, continued to chase mineral prospects with undiminished energy, though he never again applied for rights in New Guinea. I saw him once, in 1920, at a mining conference in Sydney. He had grown heavier, his hair greyer, but his handshake was as firm as ever. We spoke briefly in a crowded corridor, the noise of conversation around us like the rush of a river. "Still drawing your lines?" he asked. "Still chasing your rocks?" I replied. He smiled, then his expression sobered. "Do you ever think of it?" he asked, without specifying what it was. "Every day," I said. He nodded as if I had confirmed something he already knew. "I tell myself we were tired," he said, "fevered, that the swamp played tricks on our senses, that our guides deserted for some mundane reason, and we invented horrors to fill the gap. I tell myself that, and sometimes I believe it. Other times—" He trailed off, his gaze drifting over my shoulder, as if he saw reeds there, and water. "Other times?" I prompted. "Other times I remember the way the ground shook," he said softly. "And I think, if that was a trick, it was a very solid one." We parted with a promise to dine together that we never kept. He died in a riding accident some years later, thrown from a horse that, according to the man who wrote to inform me, had been perfectly calm a moment before and then had shied at nothing. As for Evans, he enlisted when the war came, like so many young men. I received a short note from him in 1916, posted from somewhere in France. "They have swamps here too," he wrote, "but they are full of wire and shells instead of trees. Sometimes when the guns are quiet, the ground shakes, and I think I hear that old drumbeat. Then I remember that it is only artillery, and I am almost relieved. Give my regards to your maps." He did not come home. His name is carved on a stone in a village that has never heard of the Fly River. In the years since, I have read what I could find about the natural history of New Guinea's swamps. There are crocodiles there, of course, and large fish and eels. There are stories too, collected by anthropologists and missionaries. Tales of spirits that live in the water, of creatures that pull men under, of places where the ground is not to be trusted. Some of these can be traced to practical warnings about quicksand and hidden channels. Others are older, more opaque. I have considered in my more rational moods that what we encountered might have been some unknown species, a relic from an earlier age. The swamps are vast and little explored. It is not impossible that a large animal could live there, seldom seen by men who have no reason to linger in its domain. A kind of giant salamander, perhaps, or an amphibious mammal, its movements mistaken for malice by frightened intruders. Yet when I recall the steady, deliberate way it circled us, the peculiar pattern of its thudding, the way the forest itself seemed to listen, I find that explanation wanting. There was an intent in that movement that does not sit easily in any zoological classification I know. In the end, I have come to accept that I will not know. The world is wider and older than the grid of our maps, and there are places where our categories fray. The swamp we entered in 1910 was one such place. We walked there with our compasses and our chains, thinking to measure and name. And we were measured in turn by something that had no interest in being named. What troubles me most, even now, is not the sight of the pale hide beneath the water, nor the missing pack, nor the absent men. It is a smaller detail, one that might seem trivial to anyone who has not stood where I stood. When I woke that first night in the swamp and heard the distant thudding, I lay there and listened, and I counted the beats. 4, 3, 4, 4, 3, 4. It did not occur to me then that I was listening to a pattern, that something out there was repeating it patiently, as if waiting for an answer. Sometimes in the small hours, when the house is quiet and the city's noises have faded to a distant murmur, I lie awake and feel my own heart beating in my chest. 4 quick beats, a pause. 3, a pause. 4. It is not an exact match, of course. The human heart is less regular than a drum. But there are moments when the two rhythms seem to align, just for an instant, and in that instant, I am back in the swamp, the air cold on my skin, the water trembling around my boots, and I know with a certainty that has nothing to do with science, that whatever moved beneath that black surface is still there. Somewhere in that drowned country, listening for footsteps that may never come.